Hello, everyone. You're so welcome to the Irish Writers Centre Climate Writing Group, Writing for a Change, which we're launching today on July the 1st, 2021. My name is Valerie Bastani, and I'm the director of the Irish Writers Centre. And I wanted to take this opportunity to let you know that we're celebrating our 30th anniversary this year. And in fact, since 1991, we have done very little to deviate from our main mission, which is to support, promote, and inform writers at all stages of their career. So we began this year by announcing an increase in fees to writers. That's very heartening to us because we are one of the biggest the employers of writers in the state, and indeed, if not the biggest. So that's a great pleasure to be able to do that. We've also introduced a series of new course bursaries aimed primarily at attracting writers from a diverse backgrounds. And these are for writers in the North and also writers in the South. In that regard, we really would like to thank our funders, the Arts Council of Ireland and the Arts Council of Northern Ireland, without whom we wouldn't be able to provide these resources, really. We've had 3 rounds of them and they will continue on. So the pandemic has obviously affected us like it has everybody else, but we were able to do things with it, and we were able to launch our novel fair online for the first time with winners from all over the world, and also publishers and agents from Ireland, the UK, and the USA. So it really was an international event. Programs are how we engage with our writers, how we get them to talk to one another, and also how they avail of our supports. So we're delighted that some of those programs were able to keep going, such as the Young Writer Delegates program, aimed at writers between 18 and 26. And so far, we've done 3 of them in Quirch at ILF Dublin and the West Cork Literature Festival. And we have more dates planned with other festivals throughout the year. We've also put some of our open mic sessions online, such as Taking the Mic. And we have bilingual sessions to come throughout the year. So please look out for those. If you're interested, anyone can sign up. We've connected with the libraries for the first time in a comprehensive way through our new Connections Through Literature program. And we're working with Kildare on a very exciting program in August. So do look out for that as well. I'm very proud to announce Evolution, which is a new strand of combined supports for professional writers. This is something that they have asked for. And we're delighted to be partnering with NUI Galway and also Marianne Lee, who's an IWC ambassador who is sponsoring the fees for that. We're collaborating with Fingal County Council, who have a very interesting program. They've asked us to do something for the celebration of the centenary of since the formation of the state. And we've commissioned 6 writers, 3 of whom are ambassadors, to write responses to the burning of the Coast Guard cottages in Fingal, which took place almost to the day 100 years ago. So that's going to be something. The responses will be videoed and put up on the walls and all around Fingal during Culture Night. So if you're in the area, do look out for that. So just looking ahead, we're going to continue with the same burning speed that we have been doing. We're launching a new website. We're also trialing our first fully online recorded writing course with Conor Costick. And I've been kindly invited by Enda Wiley and Peter Sir to do a special edition of their Books for Breakfast podcast, where we'll be talking about the 30 years since the inception of the Irish Writers Centre. And for those of you who know Peter, you'll know that he was the first director. So that should be an interesting conversation. So over to tonight now. So it gives me great pleasure to have the former President of Ireland, Mary Robinson, agree to launch our new climate writing group. So you'll hear from her. And after the recording, you'll be in the great hands of our programming officer, Betty Stenson, who will introduce you to Lynn Buckle and Marianne Lee. And they will tell you more about our plans for our writing group. So enjoy the evening and look forward to your joining the group.
30th anniversary.
I am delighted to hand you over now to Mrs. Mary Robinson.
Thank you and greetings to you all. I am so pleased that the Irish Writers Centre is marking its 30th anniversary by initiating the Irish Writers Centre Climate Writing Group, Writing for a Change. You shouldn't underestimate the importance of this move, because the climate crisis, frankly, needs creative writing and needs storytelling to bring out the urgency and to bring it home to people in their lives. It's good also that the group will be open to writers of every genre, because we need diverse voices on this topic. I even stretched myself, as you heard in the kind introduction. I decided to write a storytelling book myself. This was after my foundation on climate justice had just wound up, because we'd achieved our objectives as a foundation, and I wanted to communicate the message better about climate change. So with the help of Katrina Palmer, I wrote a storytelling book. There are 11 stories. 9 of them involve women, but there are also 2 good men. And it's all about how not being responsible for the problem of climate, because they lived in the poorest countries and communities in small island states, they were fighting back to make their communities and their countries more resilient and building resilience against the climate shocks that they were suffering, even though they weren't responsible for them. And that, of course, is part of climate justice. Then I stretched myself a bit further, because I decided I wanted to communicate maybe with a documentary, and I was advised, no, you're not the right person to make a documentary. Why don't you make a podcast? And being an elder, I asked the question, what's a podcast? And I was introduced to Maeve Higgins, who told me she was 8 years old when I was elected president. She at the time, and since, is a successful comedian working in New York City, and writes a lot for the New York Times and other publications. And she and I did a test, and it worked wonderfully, because she was only half respectful of me, and we were going to be interviewing women about climate. Maeve didn't know about climate, so people were learning about it through her questions. She's terrific at asking questions, and of course, she has such a good sense of humor that we laugh a lot. And then we extended to our excellent producer, Tamali Kodikari from Sri Lanka, because we didn't want to talk to women of the global south and women of the south of the United States and be just two Irish women. We extended it also to Tamale, precisely to get that diversity of perspectives that I'm encouraging you to have in your writers group. I'm also glad that you want to have a particular focus on positive solutions. When I talk to audiences, and of course I do this all the time, I try to encourage them to take 3 steps. The first step is to make the climate crisis personal in your own life, because it's that serious. And I say, you know you're doing this if you do something more urgently than before, like recycling more carefully, using energy more efficiently, or even changing your diet. Secondly, get angry with those who aren't taking their responsibility, like governments, like cities, like corporations, like investors, because they should be moving. We're not on course yet for a safe world, and they have more responsibility. And then I say, but the third step is the most important. And this is the one I'd love you to really focus on. We need to see and want and be hurrying towards this world that we have to get to by 2030, and know we're on course for a safe world. It's a big challenge for Ireland and for every country. And it's going to need excitement, creative thinking about it. It's going to be a much healthier world, because we won't have the fumes of fossil fuel, indoor and outdoor, which kill somewhere between 7 and 8 million people a year. And a lot of the deaths are women with cooking through coal and oil and kerosene, and ingesting smoke, and their children ingesting it as well. We will have to have a more equal world, because the developing world too will have had to have access to energy. Think of the 800 million people who don't have access to electricity in our world. they will have it. They'll have to have it by 2030 if we're going to be on course. This will change their lives. It will change the way they do business. It'll give them an opportunity also to have the green jobs and the green future that we need. So I really want writers to
Hi, I'm just having some issues playing the video there. So I think I'll play it again at the end so that everyone gets to see the full speech from Mrs. Barry Robinson. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Shona. And now we'll go directly to Betty Stenson, who will introduce Marianne and Lynn. Thank you. Betty?
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Well, it was very difficult to follow that inspirational woman. So instead, I'll very shortly introduce you to two more inspirational women. I hope you can all hear me now.
Yes.
Before that, I just want to go through a few, yes?
Betty, we can hear you perfectly.
Okay. This video is being live streamed to the Irish Writers Centre YouTube channel. Please give it a like and a share as you're looking back over it. We want to spread the word. We would also be adding the link to our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram accounts. So please do like and share where appropriate also. You'll find all of the links in the chat function. You'll also find the link to join next week's session on Zoom, the inaugural Writing for a Change session that's taking place on Wednesday, the 7th of July. As you will know by now, the sessions are free to all and writers of every genre are welcome. On the occasion of our 13th anniversary, the Irish Writers Centre wants to make an impact on our world going forward. And Writing for a Change is a gift to all writers to take away and use in their work. Please do remember, though, that this is a pilot programme and we welcome feedback as we go along. You can ask any pertinent questions in the question and answer function, and my colleague Shauna and myself will answer them as we go along. But we've left 10 minutes at the end for Lynn and Marianne to answer questions also. It's after we're launching Writing for a Change on July the 1st, since we spent the first 6 months of the year putting the project together with Lynn. Lynn is the inspiration behind the Climate Writing Group, and we are honoured that she chose to bring her ideas, her enormous talent, and her vast experience of climate writing to us. Thank you, Lynn. So just to introduce Lynn now, I'm going to, Lynn is a qualified adult education tutor whose fiction and poetry reflect on social themes. Her debut novel, The Groundsman Men, was published by Epoch Press in 2018, followed by several anthologies and literary articles. Lynn's second novel, What Willow Says, was published by Epoch Press in May of this year. In it, she explores nature, landscape, and place from a disability perspective. Lynn is part of the worldwide climate writers movement, seeking to effect change through her fiction. She currently represents Ireland as the UNESCO City of Literature Virtual Writer in Residence 2021 at the UK's National Centre for Writing. We're very happy to welcome a very special guest, Marianne Lee, who was a 2019 finalist in the Irish Writers Centre Novel Fair, so lots of connections here. Marianne grew up in Tullamore, County Offaly, and now lives in Dublin with her husband. She has a degree in visual communications from the National College of Art and Design and an MPhil in creative writing from Trinity College, Dublin. She works as a designer and copywriter. Her debut novel, Quiet Tide, is a fictionalized account of the life of Ellen Hutchings, Ireland's first female botanist. It was published in 2020 by New Island and was shortlisted for the 2021 Kate O'Brien Award. So I am going to hand you over now to these two inspirational women.
Well, thanks very much, Betty, and thank you very much to the Irish Writers Centre for getting behind the climate writing group in such a fulsome way, and for Mary Robinson for launching it for us. And I thought she was the absolutely perfect former president to do so, and with her involvement in climate justice is something that we're very interested in the climate writing group. And a lot of people ask me, well, what is climate writing? And I think it can be a lot of things. A lot of people would automatically presume it would be the speculative fiction, which people have heard about, writing about the disasters and the terrible things which are happening to our world and are going to happen. And that's useful as well in a way, because it helps us to come to terms with the trauma of that, and writing about it even helps us to come to terms with that. But there's also the role that nature writing plays as well in engendering a love of the world, such as Ellen Hutchings did, and such as Marianne Lee does in her writing. And then there are all the other genres as well, which can involve climate writing in a non-fiction way or in a fiction way. It can be embedded in literary fiction, as it is in my own novels and in my own short stories. So it can be put into a crime novel, and that's something that we're really interested in, attracting kind of romance writers, in thriller writers of every genre, published or unpublished, right? Anybody who's interested in basically affecting change through their writing can come along and join the group. And the group itself consists of a combination of guest speakers. Now, we would have fiction writers as guest speakers, we would have poetry writers, we'd have non-fiction writers coming to speak. Now, I'm not from a background that covers ecology, I'm not from a science background or a meteorology background. So we would have other NGOs, we would have scientists. We have a representative, Dr. Mary Black, coming to speak to us next week from the National Centre for Atmospheric Science in the UK. And she's a writer too, and she writes fiction. So she has that kind of balance of the two things. So sometimes as writers, we like myself, we might not have any knowledge of ecology or the solutions to the climate crisis. But some of us can make up new ideas and envision new futures and put those into our fiction, and others can draw on the scientific background which already exists. And by putting that into our fiction, we can normalize those changes that we have to make, either on an individual basis or on a political basis, on a fiscal basis, on a national level and on a worldwide level. And by putting solutions into our fiction, we are basically spreading the word further and farther afield a lot quickly. And as Mary Robinson said, there is an urgency to this. The clock is ticking, and the more people we can reach through our fiction and our non-fiction, the more likely what people are going to be used to the changes that we can make in a positive step. Because there's a cost to making changes. You know, it's going to be more expensive to each of us in a little way or in a big way. So we can help to normalise that. So as I said, the writing group will be having guest speakers. We'll be doing some book reviews, going through all those kind of the literature that exists at the moment. We'll be doing writing and some writing exercises, and we'll be sharing each other's work and helping each other along the way and sharing the skills that we all have, because we all have skills in different areas. And I thought it would be really nice speaking to Marianne Lee, because her story, A Quiet Tide, puts us at the beginning, really, of literature that begins to appreciate the world around us, because that's what Ellen Hutchings did, and she engendered, especially in me when I read the book, a love of nature and a love of botany. So you're very welcome to join us, Marianne, and I'm just dying to ask you. I know a little bit about Ellen Hutchings, but could you tell us why she's so important and tell us who she was and what she did?
She was born in 1785 in Ballylickey in County Cork. She was sent to Dublin at some stage, we don't know exactly when. She had some schooling, which would not more than likely have included science. Science was not taught to girls at the time, nor was maths, nor was Latin. That was to prove problematic for Ellen later on. When she was about 17, 18, she went to live with Whitley Stokes, who was a well-known physician in Dublin. He had been involved in the 1798 Rising, so a very active part of Dublin society on many different spheres. And Ellen went to live with him and his wife. She was in ill health, and she stayed there for a number of years as a sort of ward or governess, sort of a vague role in the household. And in the course of which she was introduced to botany, because Whitley Stokes himself was a very eminent botanist. And he was one of those, the tide of gentlemen botanists at the time, amateur botanists. So this was the era and the age of the amateur botanist, because botany was not a science that it's not a subject you would have gone to university to study. So a lot of scientific endeavor was in the hands of amateurs, and very enthusiastic amateurs. So Ellen would have been introduced to botany. At a certain stage, she went back to Cork, where she wouldn't have been for some time, to nurse her ailing mother and her ailing brother. And from, we know that it was a very challenging atmosphere for her to go into, taken away from Dublin and plunged into this very isolated environment. So Ballylickey at the time, it would have been Ballylickey House and a scattering of houses, scattering of settlements, very inaccessible, very difficult to get to, a couple of days journey to Dublin. And in this initially, hostile is not the word, but strange surroundings that she found herself in, she discovered that botany was a way for her to find herself, to acclimatize herself to this environment, and to find fulfillment for her intellect, her energy. In 1807, she started corresponding with Dawson Turner, who's again a very well-known eminent English botanist, and she began sending him plant samples from the peninsula, and she discovered many rare plants. The correspondence with Dawson Turner is extremely valuable in its own right, as a record of the study of botany study at the time. And
would she have been credited for doing all of that work as a woman of that time?
So for a period she wasn't, and this seems to have been by her choice. And in the book I surmise, and there are indications to this in some of the letters between her and her brothers, that she was waiting for permission from her oldest brother to be allowed basically to have her name published. So this would have been considered not ladylike at the time, to promote yourself, to push yourself forward in such a way. Women were expected to be modest and self-effacing and so on, and you did not, allow your name to be printed in a book. This was not something a gentlewoman would do. So either in the book, what I reckon happened, because her brother, we know from the letters, he was very slow in getting back to her on the subject. So she just went ahead anyway, and in the end gave her permission for her name to be used. And in time, she became known throughout Europe by botanists as Ellen Hutchings, this lady of Bantry Bay, who had this amazing skill, amazing talent, like approaching a gift, as one would have a gift for music. For finding rare plants. And she's also important. She documented a lot of plants she was a very talented artist. So we have a lot of her illustrations still. Kew, particularly in London, has a large collection of her illustrations. And these are of very high quality. So when Dawson Turner, who she was corresponding with, discovered that she could draw and that she could draw these plants, he got very excited. And she illustrated some of his works as well as other botanists at the time. And so you were asking, why is she important? So I'll just very briefly, she's important for science in its own right. This thread that goes back from the first, days of scientific discovery. Ellen Hutchings has her place on that timeline. She's important for the history of science, as you said earlier. She, almost right towards the very early days of scientific discovery. She's important as an Irish person of achievement. We like to celebrate them. They're important to us for many reasons. And very importantly, as far as I'm concerned, she is very important as an Irish woman of achievement. And of course, that brings with it a whole other layer of, things in terms of the advancement of women and the role of women in science and the place women can play. So Mary Robinson referred to, the personal role, to make things personal, to do what you can. And I think Ellen Hutchings is a wonderful example of somebody who did a lot with very little, who her study, her work was incredibly personal to her. That's where it started. And then it put out its fingers to the rest of the world. But that's where it began. This one woman in a very humble, small way, engaging with the natural world that was around her.
Well, you definitely get that enthusiasm across in your novel, in your fictional account of her. And how fictional did you make it? Did you have to stay very true to life? You mentioned letters there. You sound like you did a lot of research.
Yes, so we're very fortunate in that quite a lot of letters exist from both Ellen to Dawson Turner, from Ellen to James Mackay, who was involved at the Botanic Gardens at the time, as well as to her family. And from the letters to her family, we get this amazing document of life, farming life, rural life, the life of people of her class at the time in Cork and in Ireland. So the letters, sorry, Lou.
And I was wondering as well, with all the botanical research, because you wear your research lightly in terms of the botanical terminology that you use in the methods that Ellen used herself. You recount those, but it's not like reading a history book. As I said, it's very accessible to someone like me, and I definitely, I want to rush back down to West Cork and to look at all the mosses and the lichen again that you described so beautifully. But you have the Latin names and you have the terminology and you describe the microscopes, and I'm in there in the room with her. So how did you go about? It sounds like you had to do a botany degree yourself in order to write it.
Well, actually, and this is something that will come up in writers writing about climate and botany and how do they address these issues of science. And it was something I was very intimidated by at the beginning. And one way I got around it was I put myself in Ellen's position as somebody who started from nothing. So she was self-educated to a large extent. And as I said, she hadn't been taught Latin. So she had to piece it together herself as best she could. And I managed to buy copies of the book that she would have used as her primary source. So William Withering at the time had written the authority, the definitive volumes on British botany in the main. And this is what Ellen would have used to educate herself. So I got volumes of William Withering. That gave me access to the language, which is its own special and has its own poetry, which I loved. But I was conscious, as you say, of approaching it in a way that was serious enough that it would give weight to the book and give weight to the idea of this being a work about a scientist, but also that it would be accessible to readers, because pages and pages and pages of scientific data is not appealing to someone who's who's primarily looking for fiction. So I suppose the role of entertainment is something that I'm sure you'll cover, and how we harness the idea of entertaining the reader to get across other ideas.
I think you do that in a very honeyed way. I'd like to say, we can come across and we can scare people with our knowledge, or we could scare people with the consequences of climate change, or we can seduce them. And I think that's what you do as a writer, with the beautiful descriptions of nature and the emotional connections to the characters that we build up, because there's a whole love story kind of going on in the background. It's a love story of the nature, but there are also love stories and possible opportunities which keep the reader going. There's a pace to the story as well, isn't there? But like you said, the research, as writers, we don't have to be the experts. we can be the vehicles for those experts, can't we, for that expert knowledge. And we always research, don't we, whatever we're writing.
Yes.
We do the research.
Yes, and the research, I mean, I would have done a lot of research beforehand, but of course, when you're writing, particularly historical fiction, the research never ends. Up to the last minute that the book goes to print, you are still double checking things, and also I was very fortunate through Ellen's great-great-grandniece, Madeline Hutchings, so she would have had many contacts through her work with the Ellen Hutchins Festival, with botanists and people who work down in that particular part of Cork, and she was able to put me in touch with people who I was able to speak with and ask to, check some of my work, double check some of my research. And they were incredibly, particularly Claire Herdman of the National Parks and Wildlife Service, was incredibly generous in reading some of, checking some of the more technical aspects and saying to me, no, that wouldn't be that bird, that flower would not be in bloom at the time. And I did strive as much as possible for that authenticity. I mean, there's always bound to be things that you get wrong, but you want to minimize that as much as possible. So, I mean, I met some fascinating people in the course of writing the book. And interestingly, one of the botanists that I met, I would have perhaps feared that botanists or scientists, when hearing of something like this, would perhaps be, maybe this was all my fear, that it might be hostile to the idea of somebody perhaps approaching the subject in a light way or trivializing the idea of science. And in fact, the botanists I met were actually thrilled. They loved the idea of botany being almost taken to this level of art, and that what the book showed was the importance of botany in culture, because at the time, botany was seen as being a very appropriate realm of occupation for women particularly. And there was Mary Delaney, for example, who's the very talented, she created beautiful collages from paper and became very, very well known, and they're still very well known and famous today. So yeah, it was an area that women were permitted to work in. So, and women really went with that, and they took botany, and there were many, many layers of what came out in that, to do with women's sexuality, to do with women's education, to do all that sort of thing. But yeah, the research is crucial. I would advise people, don't be afraid. Try and approach it from the point of view of your character. You only need to know as much as your character would know. That's another.
That's a really good tip. You only need to know as much as your character needs to know, because it's like you said, the research is a rabbit hole. You keep going, finding more and more, and it's what do you cut out. But like you said, you took it from the point of view of Ellen Hutchins, who you say was a beginner herself when she started, and writing as that beginner. So that's a wonderful way of going about it, really, isn't it? I know in one of my stories, I transferred a particular story and made it a mythological story. And it turned it into a myth and kind of moved it around a bit to make it more relevant, so that it wove into the story rather than looking like I had just plonked a positive climate solution into the story. I had to kind of find some way of weaving it in and making it a real part of it in some sort of way. I was really, really, really loved some of the bits that in your stories when you were observing, or rather not you, the character Ellen was observing changes which were happening that back in the 1800s, the early 1800s. I think she was writing in the story anyway about some changes in Bantry Bay and the fishing industry there, which is very relevant to what we're talking about now, and climate change and the Anthropocene and the effect of humans on the planet and the damage we're doing. Do you want to tell us something about that?
Yes, well, I'll just read, actually, if I may, just a very short piece. I have a heading here in my book, Pilchards. So, this is Ellen and her mother have gone to Bantry for the day. And so at the time, Bantry was a very quiet, sleepy town. So they're walking around the harbour and they're discussing the town and what they know of the town. So the harbour at least was busy. Boats pulling in, boats setting out. Mainly hookers that fished the waters of the bay and beyond for hake, mackerel, herring and sprats, from Monday dawn to Saturday nightfall. Ellen and Leonora picked along the quays, watching their feet, avoiding piles of scales and fish guts, discussing each boat, its name, its owner, what they knew about the man and his family, the town and its history. They say the pilchards have all but disappeared, Leonora said. Were they as numerous as people say? They spilled onto the quays like a great shining river. I expect that's why they eventually diminished, taken in such numbers. Perhaps they went elsewhere, compelled by some change in the water, indiscernible to the fishermen, Ellen said. A mystery, Leonora sighed. All we know is the great stream of silver came to an end. But the town adapted. To survive, yes.
So she's already noticing back in the 1800s how we are damaging the planet, you know, and it's, as a botanist, she was doing the record keeping and making the observations, taking the measurements, telling us what existed. And now, you know, 2021, we're seeing what isn't there now. And so we still need the record keepers, and we still need the people, the scientists taking the measurements to tell us, well, that's not there anymore.
Yeah.
And it's because of us.
Yes. So I mean, the many plants that Ellen documented, you know, as with animal life, we can document the effects of human activity by seeing what has happened since then. We've got, you know, over 200 years of a record there to judge by. Another aspect of the book that I think is there are aspects that are relevant in terms of Ellen's interaction with the locals who are dependent on the landscape for their livelihood, and so this was an extremely poor part of Ireland, which was probably comparable to parts of the developing world now, in terms of poverty and deprivation. And there is a tension between Ellen as this, she's a gentlewoman of the landlord class, and she is walking around this environment, and she is looking at nature in a certain way. But many of the local people, they will look at nature in a different way. So there's an encounter she has with a local fisherman. If you wouldn't mind, I'll just read that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So this is Mr. Murphy that she meets. She's actually out collecting plants. And there's just a little exchange that maybe illustrates that aspect. Miss Hutchings, is it? She whipped upright. A Bantry man she knew, Michael Murphy, with a woman and 3 children behind him on the rocks, his family. The woman had a basket strapped to her back. Good morning, Mr. Murphy. The weather's holding, he said cautiously. He had a bluff, good-natured face. That it is. Will it brighten later, do you think? Quiet, Letty. The dog had stiffened, growling. At Ellen's voice, she stopped. Mr. Murphy looked into the sky. There's a breeze might lift it. He nodded in the general direction of Ballylickey. Mrs. Hutchings as well, Mr. Hutchings? Very well. Are these your children? Yes, miss. You're lucky to have so much help. I am. Mrs. Murphy stayed at a distance. Her hair, loose and uncovered, the colour of pale rust, blew around her head. She might not speak English as well as her husband, if at all. The children clustered near their father, watching Ellen with naked curiosity. Their feet were bare. Are you collecting rack, miss? Yes, she said. They say you're interested in it. I am. He scrunched up his eyes as though this were a great mystery. And what would you be collecting rack for, if I might be so bold? She remembered her bare hands and rummaged in the bag for her gloves, feeling her way under the paper. There are educated men in Ireland and England who have need of specimens. Do they pay? No, no, she smiled. I send 1 sample of each dried, with the seeds if I can find them attached. Drying fuchi had proved another challenge, though less tedious than using the box of sand. Once home, she floated each plant in a large shallow dish of water to extract the salt, separating and expanding the delicate branches. She would then slide a stiff piece of writing paper into the water underneath and remove it slowly so that the plant remained in its expanded state. After trial and error, she'd worked out the pressure necessary to apply the blotting paper and weights, then how to preserve the sample on paper, suspended in all its beauty and colour as though still underwater. Before she could explain some of this to Mr. Murphy, he said, For what purpose? Well, for examination and study, to understand how a plant connects to the rest of the natural world. For example, to learn how it, she paused, about to say reproduces. To learn how it thrives or why it does not. Ah, a dismissive sound, unbelieving. He stared beyond her at the sea. They just grow, miss, as and how they will, as they've always done. Certainly, but they still might teach us something about how plants generally prosper or fail. They're wild, miss, God-given. It's for him to know the workings of his creation. Of course, she stepped forward in her eagerness to explain. But having created the world, would God not want us to appreciate it? Have you never wanted to know how a thing functioned? A desire to understand why it does what it does? And if you did understand, might it not assist you in your dealings? His face creased in polite concentration. If you say so, miss. The children continued to squint at her open-mouthed. No doubt they knew more about the tides, the weather, the landscape than she would in a lifetime. She felt suddenly foolish.
Doesn't that just sum up? That's beautiful reading, thank you. That really sums up, you've shown us there how when justice and equality doesn't exist, how difficult it is to bring about something like a change and a solution to the climate crisis. There's somebody back in the 1800s who, would probably be eating seaweed, through starvation, through poverty, looking at somebody measuring and drawing and record keeping and doing her botany, and they're just completely worlds apart, and nothing has changed either in the last 200 years. We still have vast numbers of the population who are in that position, who are suffering the effects of climate change through flooding, through drought, through rising temperatures. And how can they possibly afford to make any changes to their lives? I know Mary Robinson was talking earlier about women and children and anybody in the home suffering from the effects of breathing in carbon fuels from their cooking, through cooking over methane, different gases. And her campaign starts tomorrow, called the Clean Cooking Manifesto, which is an attempt of the elders to bring clean electrification for cooking to all parts of the world, so that they can have a clean fuel, not just to save the planet, but to save those individuals' lives as they're working with it. And I think the idea of climate justice has to be one of the solutions. There's no point a first world rich person saying to the third world, well, stop burning coal, because that might happen to be their local fuel and that's all they can afford. And I think Kim Stanley Robinson, who wrote Ministry for the Future, and Amitav Ghosh, who wrote Gun Island, they're both very aware of that when they wrote their fiction as well, of how do we ensure that all these solutions are possible for everybody, instead of solutions being imposed on certain people and things being taken away, and understanding that, yes, we can all do something. We can all do something probably in Ireland, in the first world, where we can probably all do more recycling. We can all consume less. We can all do something, and our policymakers can, and the fiscal economies can change. But it's always the very poorest who suffer most from those changes. Yes. So unless we can find a way of making equitable changes, even something as basic as, transport, which still doesn't exist in a lot of places in Ireland, public transport, that making a rule about transport and making cars more expensive is a good thing for the planet, and making them run on electricity is a good thing. But it's the poorer people who can't afford those, and they rely on public transport. And does the public transport exist? That infrastructure costs. And I think that's the problem that our government has at the moment, is how do we bring about all these solutions, which we have to bring about, not just because of the 10-year rule that we have to cut our carbon in half in the next 10 years. We have to stop emitting so much carbon in the first place. But we have to do it so that we have a planet in the future, in the next 20 years, that half of Dublin isn't flooded. So I think what you're writing and what we're going to be writing through the climate group and what other writers are doing is we're trying to kind of normalize these ideas through our fiction, and we can do that by seducing the reader, or we can do it by exciting the reader and entertaining them, or we can do it by shocking the reader. And I don't think we need to, any of us as writers need to change the genres that we write in or the style that we write in. I'll continue to write literary fiction, and you'll continue to write your literature, and everybody who joins us is going to be either a speculative fiction writer, or they might not even know what area of writing they want to, what tunnel they want to go down, but they'll discover that with us, I hope as we're in the climate writing group, and find a style that suits them, and find, like you have, and like Kim Stanley Robinson did, find a way of accessing audiences through our literature and encouraging.
Yeah, I would say to people, I mean, I didn't set out to write a book about nature. You know, nature was going to be part of it because I was writing about a botanist. But having said that, it comes very naturally to me because, excuse me, I'm able to tap into the memories that I have, particularly as a child, where I grew up in, relatively on the outskirts of a town. So from a child's point of view, it was a rural environment, if not strictly a rural environment. And I would advise people to, tap into those memories. Start with something small. It doesn't have to be a giant statement about, it can be, of course. Maybe you want to write, dystopian fiction in which you let your imagination completely go wild. But excuse me. Otherwise, I think starting with the personal is a good place to start. And I think we all have these memories, of a child when we were so close to nature as a child. And I know we're going to mention maybe very briefly a couple of books that we've thought handles the issue of climate change, ecology, nature, and so on in a good way. But I mean, particularly, I think children's literature, which is another thing again, is incredibly important in awakening in children a love of nature. And certainly when I was a child, things like Watership Down, I don't think I've recovered since from Watership Down. I think when you read that book, it changes you forever. You look at the world in a very different way. And particularly through the eyes of animals, when we see the world through the eyes of animals, it's extremely powerful. There's no more powerful way to illustrate the effects of our activities on creatures that are powerless and who are utterly dependent on nature in a way that we like to think that we are not, even though we are to the same extent. Also, the Run with the Wind series, and to mention an Irish author by Tom McCaughrean, I would have read as a child about foxes and the whole environment of foxes and the whole world of foxes. Extremely powerful books, again, which again, just they change you forever. You're just going to look at the world in a different way. Yeah,
but that's how storytelling, which has that emotional hook, isn't it? That's what really works. If you have the emotional hook, you'll pull the reader in, and they'll connect with you, and whatever message is in there will be much easier to take on board and to understand, and to create that love of nature, and to create the desire to save what we have. And especially, as you said, our animals are such an emotive thing for us as humans. We make those childhood connections, and it can be very, very deep indeed. I know I was reading, it was just a short story, and it was going the other way completely. It was going into the future and imagining a positive future rather than the disasters which are likely to befall us if we do nothing. And the writer's name was Vrinda Baliga, and the story was Roots. It was a short story in an anthology of writers taken from around the world, and the anthology, for anybody who wants to look it up, was called And Lately the Sun, and that was published by Calyx Press. And I mention this because she really does imagine a new future where trees and science and construction all combined together, and she imagined building houses from a modified and scientifically produced tree cell. And so we have these building blocks made out of tree cells, and she builds a house out of these and builds apartment blocks, and they become living organisms, and they know how to cool and to warm the insides and the interiors of the house. And it's completely left field, completely off the ball, completely made up out of her own imagination. And you think, well, there's an idea which can then be fed to scientists to work on. You know, it's completely off the wall. Why not give it a go? And that's what writers have always done in the past. And then also writers can also, as we mentioned at the beginning, take the science that does exist and normalize it for the rest of us and make it more accessible. So yeah, that was one of my favourite reads, just because it suddenly came up with a solution so quickly. But Kim Stanley Robinson's Ministry of the Future, I found, came up with all the solutions, and it was fiction. And for somebody like myself who doesn't understand economics or government policy or any of the science side, it was brilliant for me, because Kim, he actually put everything all in one book, and you know, it can give you an interest to go off into other directions anyway, and it's pure fiction, and there's a thriller side to it, not a thriller so much, but you know, there's a pace to it that makes you want to get to the end, find out what happens to this world. Do they solve the problems before there's a disaster? You know, it starts off with a tiny disaster, which is pretty nasty. It's exactly like what's happening at the moment in Canada, you know, a heat wave. So he only wrote it as if it was happening in 2 years' time, and it's happening right today, right this moment as we speak. So it's not the science fiction of the far future. It's happening now, and I think, you know, a lot of writers have come to that position already. And I can see actually Betty's itching to ask us some questions. There's something coming in as we're going away. So before I start answering any questions, to anybody who is listening, I'd love you to come along and join us in the climate writing group next Wednesday, 7th. And you'll see how to join that later on, or down in the chat, and Betty can tell you about that. And brilliant, Marianne, thank you very much. And I did recommend actually Marianne's book to the UNESCO Cities of Literature. So Iceland, Poland, Edinburgh, New Zealand all know about A Quiet Tide and have it in their libraries now. Thanks to you. So do we have any questions there, Betty?
Hi, Lynn. Thank you so much for that. And Marianne, it was absolutely riveting. And I could listen for another hour at least, but you did warn us in advance that you could talk all night about it. So I'm just stepping in actually to say we don't have questions. We have lots of really nice comments. I think you might have answered a lot of the questions that people had. I was just wondering if we would play Mary Robinson video again, if you don't mind. And then while that's playing, if anybody does actually have questions, please put them in the questions and answers section. And also I put the link in the chat for next Wednesday for the inaugural session of the Irish Writers Centre Writing for a Change climate writing group. So Sean, are you there?
I am, I'm here.
How are you feeling about the video now?
I think there was a loading problem with it earlier, but I think it's going to work now. Yeah.
If we could start it from the beginning with Valerie's introduction, then that'd be brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll play it now.
So don't forget to put questions in the questions and answer section if you have any while the video is playing.
Dear Eve, my name is Valerie Bastani, and I'm the director of the Irish Writers Centre. I'd like to welcome you all to a new initiative which we're launching in this, our 30th anniversary year as the national flagship for writers and writing on the island of Ireland. The initiative in question is called Writing for a Change, and It's IWC's new climate writing group. It aligns perfectly with our wish to make a positive and relevant impact on the world for at least another 30 years. To celebrate its launch, I'm honored to introduce to you Mrs. Mary Robinson, who is of course well known to you all. Mrs. Robinson served as the President of Ireland from 1990 to 1997. And in 1997, she took up a new appointment as the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. She returned to live in Ireland at the end of 2010 and has since set up the Mary Robinson Foundation Climate Justice, which aims to be a center for thought leadership, education, and advocacy on the struggle to secure global justice for victims of climate change. A tireless campaigner for human rights, Mrs. Robinson has emerged as a world leader in the fight for climate action. And in 2004, she received Amnesty International's Ambassador of Conscience Award for her human rights work. She's also an author, and her book, Climate Justice, Hope, Resilience, and the Fight for a Sustainable Future, was published in 2018. And it has been described as an antidote to your climate change paralysis. The book urges its readers to take action on environmental destruction and lends a deeply humane perspective to the ongoing climate crisis. So for all these reasons, it is a most appropriate privilege that Mrs. Robinson has kindly agreed to launch our climate writing group, Writing for a Change. It is our hope that this group will be a space for writers to come together to speak, write, think, and learn about climate positive solutions, and to promote these ideas in their writing from here on in. So without further ado, I am delighted to hand you over now to Mrs. Mary Robinson.
Thank you, and greetings to you all. I am so pleased that the Irish Writers Centre is marking its 30th anniversary by initiating the Irish Writers Centre Climate Writing Group, Writing for a Change. You shouldn't underestimate the importance of this move, because the climate crisis, frankly, needs creative writing and needs storytelling to bring out the urgency and to bring it home to people in their lives. It's good also that the group will be open to writers of every genre, because we need diverse voices on this topic. I even stretched myself, as you heard in the kind introduction. I decided to write a storytelling book myself. This was after my foundation on climate justice had just wound up, because we'd achieved our objectives as a foundation, and I wanted to communicate the message better about climate change. So with the help of Katrina Palmer, I wrote a storytelling book. There are 11 stories. 9 of them involve women, but there are also 2 good men. And it's all about how, not being responsible for the problem of climate, because they lived in the poorest countries and communities in small island states, they were fighting back to make their communities and their countries more resilient, and building resilience against the climate shocks that they were suffering, even though they weren't responsible for them. And that, of course, is part of climate justice. Then I stretched myself a bit further, because I decided I wanted to communicate maybe with a documentary, and I was advised, no, you're not the right person to make a documentary. Why don't you make a podcast? And being an elder, I asked the question, what's a podcast? And I was introduced to Maeve Higgins, who told me she was 8 years old when I was elected president. She at the time, and since, is a successful comedian working in New York City, and writes a lot for the New York Times and other publications. And she and I did a test, and it worked wonderfully, because she was only half respectful of me, and we were going to be interviewing women about climate. Maeve didn't know about climate, so people were learning about it through her questions. She's terrific at asking questions, and of course, she has such a good sense of humor that we laugh a lot. And then we extended to our excellent producer, Tamali Kodikari from Sri Lanka, because we didn't want to talk to women of the global south and women of the south of the United States and be just two Irish women. We extended it also to Mali, precisely to get that diversity of perspectives that I'm encouraging you to have in your writers group. I'm also glad that you want to have a particular focus on positive solutions. When I talk to audiences, and of course I do this all the time, I try to encourage them to take 3 steps. The first step is to make the climate crisis personal in your own life, because it's that serious. And I say, you know you're doing this if you do something more urgently than before, like recycling more carefully, using energy more efficiently, or even changing your diet. Secondly, get angry with those who aren't taking their responsibility, like governments, like cities, like corporations, like investors, because they should be moving. We're not on course yet for a safe world, and they have more responsibility. And then I say, but the third step is the most important. And this is the one I'd love you to really focus on. We need to see and want and be hurrying towards this world that we have to get to by 2030 and know we're on course for a safe world. It's a big challenge for Ireland and for every country. And it's going to need excitement, creative thinking about it. It's going to be a much healthier world because we won't have the fumes of fossil fuel, indoor and outdoor, which kill somewhere between 7 and 8 million people a year. And a lot of the deaths are women with cooking through coal and oil and kerosene, and ingesting smoke, and their children ingesting it as well. We will have to have a more equal world, because the developing world too will have had to have access to energy. Think of the 800 million people who don't have access to electricity in our world. They will have it. They'll have to have it by 2030 if we're going to be on course. This will change their lives. It will change the way they do business. It'll give them an opportunity also to have the green jobs and the green future that we need. So I really want writers to excite us about all of this, as well as definitely warning about the urgency and the crisis. There is a danger that the crisis is so real, it can actually overawe people. And that's, in my view, not the way to message. I actually am going to end my short message to you with the words of the founder of the Elders, which I now chair, Nelson Mandela. He brought us together in 2007. He told us we must bring hope where there is despair, and we must have courage, etc. And then I love this line of his because it's so succinct, and it kind of fits the climate crisis, which is a very real challenge to it. He says, "It always seems impossible until it is done." Thank you, and all the best to the Writers Group.
Thank you. Now we have a few questions. So Lynn, I chatted those to you. Do you want me to read them out?
Please, if you could.
Okay. So Shirley Ann Macmillan. Hi, Shirley. We know Shirley. She was one of our roving ambassadors. Shirley, can you tell us what kind of thing to expect at the Climate Writing Group? Sorry if I missed this. I've been in and out this evening. Really great launch. Thank you. And before you answer that, Lynn, we have another question somewhere from, let's see who it's from. It says, "Hi, thank you so much for hosting this incredibly inspiring group. Did I hear correctly that there will be an opportunity to share work between members, or is it just panelists who will be sharing works in progress? I imagine there are a number of writers tuning in for this program, so sharing work would be difficult." So I guess you could answer those two questions.
Yeah, sure. It won't be like it is this evening. There'll be a combination. We will have some guest speakers, but they'll be very short, so it'll be like 15 minutes each. We have Nessa Omani and Dr. Mary Black next week, and the following week we'll have somebody else, and each month we'll have different guests. One will be a writer, and one will be either an NGO or somebody with a scientific background. So that's very short. Then we will look at a couple of books. There'll be writing exercises, and there'll definitely be sharing of work. And we can do that in breakout rooms. So if there are large numbers, we'll have breakout rooms. If there are smaller numbers, we can do it in a kind of the normal model that I've been using. as a creative writing teacher over the past few years online anyway, it works quite well if you've got a small enough group. So if anybody's writing, if you're new to writing, you might be a bit shy about doing that. So nobody's forcing anybody to share their work if they're not comfortable yet. But you kind of get quite used to each other, and it's a safe place to be able to share your experiments in writing anyway. So yeah, so that's definitely a big part of it, is looking at each other's writing and helping people along the way with their writing. And we're all at different levels as well. There'll be some people who've been writing for years, and there'll be some absolute beginners, and they'll all be with different kind of scientific or non-scientific backgrounds.
Thank you so much for that, Lynn. And just to reiterate again that the link for next week's session is in the chat there. This question is for Marianne. It's from Richard Nairn. Could Marianne say how she switched seamlessly from accurate historical information about the life of her subject, Ellen Hutchings, to imaginary aspects of Ellen's thoughts and conversations? Was this a difficult transition?
Yes, it was. You can hear me? Yeah. It was a challenge. I felt a huge responsibility to Ellen, the historical figure. I wanted to do justice to her legacy. I also, wanted to be as accurate as possible, because I felt this would give credibility to the book and give credibility to Ellen Hutchings. I wanted Ellen's name to become perhaps more widely known due to the book. I felt that was important. But also, I am a fiction writer, and, I'll choose a project based on, how immediate the voice comes to me. If it's something that feels very natural, if it's something that comes to me very quickly, I know that I can walk in this person's shoes for a year and a half, 2 years. And definitely the letters, Ellen's letters, which I would love if the National Botanic Gardens would publish this book, which they brought out in the 80s, of Ellen's letters, the letters between Ellen and Dawson Turner. And it would be lovely if perhaps other publications of her letters could come out, because they are so evocative. She comes across as such a fascinating person, but also a very real, warm woman, very complex with, she didn't just think about botany. That wasn't the only, thing that occupied her. She loved reading, and she had a great imagination. She had a great aesthetic appreciation of botany. It wasn't just about Latin names and documenting numbers and so on. She took great joy. I think she took great solace in the beauty of nature. So all of these things, these are things that I could latch onto, get her voice, get the voice into my head. But it was a challenge, and it's that constant, sometimes you'll come up against a historic reality that maybe isn't convenient to your plot, and people might say, oh, why didn't this happen, or why didn't that happen? But I was working within the confines of a real person. So, I couldn't have something mad happen, like her, go off and marry Dawson Turner. And, as lovely as that would have been, that just wasn't going to happen. But within that, where I could fill in the gaps without distorting or disrespecting fact, that's what I did. And it is a challenge, but it's a great joy. And I discovered in the course of this that I am a bit of a time traveler and a bit of a ventriloquist, and maybe a little bit of an actress as well. These are all things I discovered about myself in writing the book. So,
thank you so much for that, Marianne. That was really interesting. We're coming to the end. We've actually gone over time. Lynn, have you anything this evening?
Sorry, can you say that again? You broke up there for a minute.
Have you anything you want to say to just finish off the evening?
Well, I'd just really like to thank you all for coming and watching this evening. We do have some of our future guests in the audience as well. Richard Nairn there is going to be one of our future guests too. So thank you to all our future guests who've agreed to come, and thank you to Marianne as well for coming and talking this evening, and to the Irish Writers Centre for supporting this project and making it freely available. And we haven't said that enough. It's freely available to anybody who wants to come and join, and you can drop in and have some fun as well, because that's what it turns into at the end of the day, when you're in a group of other writers and you're all nattering away about what you love, and we're in a place where everybody's enjoying what they're writing as well. So do come along next Wednesday and join us.
Valerie, would you like to come in at the end?
I would just like to say thank you very much to all of you, to Lynn, Marianne, and Betty and Shona for making this a really special evening. I've learned so much, and now I've written down all the names of the books like mad, so I've got a lot of reading to do. And I'm sure this is going to be a really exciting project. We're absolutely delighted to be supporting it. Good luck.
Thanks, Valerie. And apologies to everyone for the technical difficulties at the beginning, but I think we packed everything in the end anyway. So nothing left to say now, but thanks and good night. And really looking forward to next week, Lynn, and the 6 sessions after that, or 5 sessions after the first session. Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks to everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Marianne, and we'll see you again.
Thank you.